Welcome everyone, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for this special webinar hosted by AARP New Jersey and the Mental Health Association of New Jersey to talk about both mind and body wellness during COVID-19. I'm Christine Newman, I'm the Director of Volunteer Engagement and Community Outreach at AARP New Jersey, and I am joined today by my two co-hosts from the Mental Health Association of New Jersey, Vicki Phillips, who's the Executive Director of the Mental Health Association in Atlantic County, and she has been there for 39 years. And joining her as well is Carolyn Quinn with the Mental Health Association in Atlantic County, who oversees the Self-Help Wellness Program, and Carolyn has been with the organization for 7 years. So quick review of today's webinar before we get started and a few housekeeping items. When you joined, you were joined with your lines muted, and we just ask that everyone keeps themselves on mute throughout this presentation just to ensure the best quality experience for everyone on the line with us today. We will have time at the end for Q&A. So again, take a moment on the bottom of your screen to identify the chat function, and that's where you can put in any questions that you have, any comments, and we will make sure to address those throughout the conversation today as well. Also, for folks who might want to refer back to the information that we're talking about today, because we're going to be providing a lot of resources, connection points, this presentation will be sent out in a follow-up email that you will receive. So no worries there, you will get a copy of the PowerPoint deck. And additionally, in that follow-up email, you'll also get a link to complete a feedback survey, and we'd really appreciate any input you provide on that as well. If we could go to the next slide, please. Great. So before I turn it over to Vicki and Carolyn, who will be facilitating our main discussion and really what's the core focus of today's workshop around how do we identify signs of stress and also how do we cope during these times of uncertainty, including how do we differentiate between, I guess what we'll say is quote unquote normal stress and anxiety in a situation like this that we're all going through, and when is it maybe something a little more serious, and if that's the case, what are some of the resources and supports available for folks? Before we do that though, I did want to highlight a few AARP resources that might be of benefit for folks who are joining our discussion today. Feel free to write these down, but again, they will also be provided in the PowerPoint that you'll receive in a follow-up email. So AARP has put together a online hub of all of our coronavirus resources and information. You can see it there. It's aarp.org/coronavirus. So a lot of things I'm referencing now, you can find there. That is really a great sort of one-stop shop to link to all of our information. But there were a few things that I specifically wanted to tease out. The first being AARP is hosting a series of telephone town halls. These are national. They're happening Thursdays at 1 o'clock. As of now, the pace is about every other Thursday. But again, you can find the most recent and upcoming ones on that main website. You can also find the audio files of previous teletown halls, so you can listen in on any of them. And they've really ranged the gamut from conversations like this around how to manage stress and anxiety to talking with healthcare professionals about what are the signs and symptoms of COVID, what to do if you think you might have COVID, also to things like fraud prevention with experts from across the country. And on that same front, AARP has a national fraud watch network. This is a completely free community resource. It's available to AARP members, non-members, anyone can access this. And here you'll be able to find information not just about the scams we know are currently popping up around COVID-19. At the end of the day, con artists are doing what they do best and what they do all the time. They're taking advantage of the situation. They're taking advantage and preying on folks' emotions right now. So the Fraud Watch Network is available in two ways. One is a dedicated 877 hotline number where you or a loved one, if you think you've been a victim, can call and get connected with resources and information. And then we also have this dedicated online platform that includes tips and tools to help spot and avoid scams. It also includes what we call our digital scam tracking map, which is a great tool for consumers like you and me, because if one of us is approached by a scam, we can actually post that story right there on the map, and it then shows up for everyone else to be aware of as well. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. If you're a family caregiver or you know someone who is, I would also recommend folks check out AARP's Caregiver Resource Center. Similarly, here we have options both online or over the phone. We have a dedicated call center where caregivers can get support and resources and connected to those local supports and resources in their area. Here in New Jersey, we've built out a dedicated web page, which you can see here. It's /NJ Caregiving, where you can find updates on all of the advocacy as well as outreach work that we're doing to support caregivers through this time. And then the other main issue I wanted to cover was around our community connections. So a lot of times, I think all of us are just looking for ways to stay connected to one another, sort of in these sort of organic ways. So we have a friendly voice call where you can request for yourself or on behalf of someone else, a volunteer calls just to say hi, just to check in and see how are you doing. You can also set these up to happen on a regular basis. So if you know someone who maybe is a little socially isolated and alone right now, we can arrange to have a set call, 2 o'clock on every Wednesday for that individual. There's also our communityconnections.org platform where you can go and actually look for or create your own mutual aid groups. So mutual aid groups are ways that community members really kind of come together on their own to say, we're going to tackle this issue in our community because we want to help in X, Y, Z. So you can actually search for local groups in your community to join or start. And then if we can go to the next slide, please. And lastly, before I turn it over, I wanted to highlight the work AARP New Jersey is doing in the virtual space to support communities and members. And it's exactly this. We're working very closely with key partners to provide virtual offerings around topics that we know are top of mind for people right now. So example, mental health and stress reduction. We're also doing a series of healthy active living events. So we've been doing Zumba, yoga, Tai Chi, virtual classes. And again, these are free and open to everyone. It's a great way for folks to just have an outlet and a way to connect with each other during this. We're also doing events on Facebook related to fraud prevention. And so to find out all of these, you can find this on our website, but we also post all of our events on our Facebook page, and you can see the link there where you can also register. So with that, I am going to turn it over, and I am pleased to reintroduce my co-hosts, Vicki and Carolyn, who will facilitate our main discussion today around mind and body wellness. Vicki and Carolyn, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Christine.
Thank you. So yes, we are here this afternoon. We're excited. I started this morning off when we were talking about this topic, saying a little bit about how I myself got kind of pulled into the whole preparing for coronavirus and in our offices, and all of a sudden everybody around me was talking about the fact that I should be concerned that I was part of the vulnerable population. And I'm going to apologize up front. I have a dog. Let me let him out. Hold on one second.
I'll kind of take over in the meantime while Vicki is attending to her kids at home, the 4-footed ones at least. And, Vicki was talking about how the vulnerable categories that we all get put in, and she wasn't too happy of the vulnerable category that our office put her in. I'll let her explain more.
Thank you. Sorry. I tried to wear them out so that they would be calm for this part. Apparently they weren't worn out enough. So yes, suddenly I was being told that I was part of the vulnerable population, and I thought to myself, what are you talking about? I'm not. And then I did realize, yes, you are over the age, and you are one of the people that should be concerned about this. And that was kind of it was like somebody punched me in the gut, and I never saw myself in that role. And I'm sure that many people on here may have that same reaction when people in your family or your loved ones started treating you a little differently and saying, well, you should be careful, you shouldn't go here, you shouldn't go there. So this whole topic of stress on your mental health and your physical health really does hit home very clearly. Carolyn and I are both working on a FEMA grant, and we've been doing a lot of different groups, and I've been working with a boomers group on Tuesday nights, and it's for people who are, of the baby boomer generation, and we've been grappling with a lot of these issues. So stress is on all of our minds. So we're happy to be partnering with AARP and having this discussion today. So let's kind of get into the meat of things. So with the outbreak of coronavirus, there has been no doubt it's been much more stressful for people. There's fear, there's anxiety about the disease. It can be overwhelming, and it can cause very strong emotions in both children and adults. And even before COVID came onto the scene, older adults faced greater risk factors such as social isolation, financial challenges, illness, grief, loss. Now, each of these factors are associated with greater rates of anxiety and depression. Now, add the stress of COVID into this equation, and you have, quite a disastrous brew churning away. These issues increase our risk for poor outcomes, and they can also contribute to a higher mortality from a variety of underlying medical conditions. As a result, the COVID-19 pandemic, society will see a surge in mental health issues. We're going to see it across the board, not just in seniors, but also in medical workers, in EMS, and all kinds of essential worker categories that didn't have to deal with this kind of stress on top of their own daily life stressors. But for some older adults with pre-existing mental health challenges, these social distancing requirements will increase their anxiety, it'll increase their depression, and possibly their fear, which in the end can lead to even greater social isolation and loneliness and further decay their mental wellness. So it's not all bad news, because on the plus side, seniors with or without known behavioral or mental health concerns can demonstrate extraordinary resilience because of their years of life experience, the perspective that they bring with that, and also the wisdom of just having lived through so many things. You can go to the next one. Thank you. So what are some of the common effects of stress on the body and mind? You see a lot of things listed here. Stress is kind of how the brain and the body respond to any demand. So any type of challenge, such as performance at work, a significant life change, a traumatic event, these all can be stressful. Stress can affect your health. It's important to pay attention to how you deal with minor and major stressors so you know when to seek help. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. But here are 5 things you should know about stress. Everyone experiences stress from time to time. And there's different kinds of stress. There's good stress and bad stress, all of which carry physical and mental health risks. A stressor may be a one-time or short-term occurrence, or it can happen repeatedly over a long time. Some people may cope with stress more effectively and recover from stressful events more quickly than others. The second thing is when we face a dangerous situation, stress kind of signals your body to prepare to face that threat or to flee to safety. In those situations, your pulse quickens, you start to breathe faster, your muscles tense up, your brain uses more oxygen and increases activities. All of these body reactions are geared for your survival and response to the stress. But in non-life-threatening situations, stress can be more of a motivation thing. That's where it's a good kind of stress, where if you need to take a test or go for a job interview, that stress may get you more, amped up to be better prepared. The third thing is coping with the impact of chronic stress can be really challenging because the source of long-term stress is much more constant than the acute stress. The body never really kind of gets a clear signal when to go back to functioning normally. So with chronic stress, those same life-saving reactions that the body has can disturb the immune system, the digestive system, cardiovascular, sleep, reproductive systems. So people may experience mainly symptoms, but this is compounding on their body. So if you take, the fourth thing is if you take practical steps to manage your stress, you can reduce it, and you can also reduce those health effects. So that's the good part. And 5, you should also know that when you're overwhelmed by stress, that's the time that you need to seek professional help. And it shows you on the chart all the different ways that it can affect your mind, your body, and your behavior. And those are, I mean, we can all talk about those things, such as, you know, the kind of the joking about the COVID-15. Everybody's been a little bit overeating, although some people have been undereating. I wish I was one of those. Angry outbursts, and there's definitely incidences of increased drug and alcohol use. People feeling overwhelmed. I've heard that a lot. People feeling out of control. They don't know how to respond to things. Fatigue. Okay, you can go to the next one.
Absolutely. And a lot of this can become compounded into grief. And when Vicki and I first started working on our FEMA grant, and I was doing a similar presentation, a lot of the feedback that I received was, well, I'm not grieving. And we'll look at different types of loss, and Vicki will kind of walk us through them. But the thing to really stress here is best said by David Kessler. We are all dealing with the collective loss of the world we knew. And I'm going to say that again because I really want everyone to hear this and let it sink in. We're all dealing with the collective loss of the world as we knew. I often hear folks talk about, oh, you know, when I used to go to the airport pre 9/11 and post 9/11, of course, there's going to be some sort of security. I believe that in the future, we will talk about a world in which there was pre-COVID and post-COVID. And with that anticipation, many of us are really grieving the loss of the world that we knew pre-COVID. And if we're able to put ourselves in that mindset that we are grieving, we're going to be able to potentially heal faster because we're going to be pulling good resources around how to deal with grief and not just that, well, our world is different, the new normal. And I want to read this quote from David Kessler. And for folks that don't know, David Kessler is one of the individuals that really helped identify different stages of grief. And he was interviewed with Brene Brown, and she, in her own right, is a fabulous researcher. She has several books that you could get out at the library. You could YouTube her TED Talk. She has this podcast. Definitely a good person to listen to or read about. But so they were, you know, talking about COVID and the recommendations that can be made for us to support each other. And so David Kessler wrote, each person's grief is unique as their fingerprint. But what everyone has in common is that no matter how they grieve, they share a need for their grief to be witnessed. That doesn't mean needing someone to try and lessen it or reframe it for them. The need is for someone to be fully present to the magnitude of their loss without trying to point out the silver linings. And I imagine that many folks on our webcast today will agree with wanting to help people. And so it can be tough to sit with someone and really try to acknowledge their grief, witness their grief without reframing it, without trying to find silver linings. And from this helping, desire, I think that we all want to make it better for people. And actually the best thing we can do is sit with them in the yuck and be with them. So some really good kind of takeaways from David Kessler. And Vicki's going to talk a little bit more about grief, and we'll also put up another slide about all the different types of things and losses you can be grieving. But it's just a really good mindset to potentially be viewing what's going on right now.
Thanks, Carolyn. So a particular tragedy in this pandemic has been the social disconnect between older adults and their families and friends. Those are the very people who ordinarily offer the support through those vital connections which are key to successful aging. So we are absolutely experiencing the loss of those friends and those friendships that we saw in place. When Carolyn told me the reaction that she had with one group that she had about this, people were saying, you know, they didn't feel that they had lost. I have kind of felt the same thing, because we typically think of loss as that in death, loss of, you know, a friend or a loved one, but we don't necessarily think of loss without it. So there's all kinds of losses.
So some of these losses can include financial anxiety. Thinking about the way the market has gone and all of these pieces around rising costs and limited income can really be one of the losses that you potentially could be grieving.
Right, thank you. Also, the whole thing about plans. Think about how many things that we have lost as far as weddings, special events, high school graduations, college graduations. My son was supposed to graduate and there was no graduation. I can't even imagine what it would have been like not to have my college graduation. Also, the fact that oftentimes we had a woman talk at our group last night a lot about clashes with family members over how to protect yourself. How often I have heard over the last couple months that a person would say, yeah, I'm taking this seriously. I don't want to catch COVID. And my fill in the blank, my daughter, my son, my husband isn't taking it as seriously. They're not wearing their masks. They're going out in public. And I don't want them bringing it home to me. And this one particular woman that talked a lot last night was talking about the fact that she's not even talking to her son. Her son won't talk to her. And I felt so horribly bad for her, because, you know, that's the kind of thing that causes more stress on you in a time where you need the more support from your families. There's also the grief over worries about rising costs and limited income, the sadness about how we feel about the world that we've lost, the world we used to know how to function through it. The anxiety we're experiencing about finances and how things are costing more. I know I've noticed significantly, you know, there are some cost savings. I don't spend as much money when on going out or doing things out in the world. Just going to the office, picking up coffee every day costs more money. But in return, it seems like everything jumped in price, so that when you add it all up, it feels like you're spending more each month on groceries and things. Also, you're worried about your loved ones. Those are losses, you know, just not having the time together. Worrying about quarantine, feelings of isolation, fears for the future, and those relationships, especially as we get older. You know, I said to somebody the other day, as I didn't think that my golden years were going to be spent locked up in my house worrying about where I can go and who I can see. And that, you know, when you have less time than you do on earth as a 20-year-old looking ahead, you start to grieve that time loss. You can go to the next one. So coping with grief. So there's a journey with grief, and you have to really recognize your losses and be able to put them in words and to talk about them and be with the pain and understand that that's where it's coming from. You have to also accept all your feelings, even though they're feelings you don't like. You may feel very sad about them. You may be angry. These are things you may not want to feel. That's the next one. It's okay to be angry about it. You have a right to be. You know, things have changed drastically. You're vulnerable, so be gentle with yourself. How often do we say, you hear somebody say, if I talk to myself if I talk to others the way I talk to myself, who would want to be friends with me? You need to be good to yourself. You need to talk well to yourself. You're not alone. You should, take time. We have lots of different support groups. AARP has groups. There's different things that you can do to be with other people and not be alone. And then as far as if it's something that's really pressing on you and you're starting to experience suicidal thoughts, that can be a symptom of your pain. And is absolutely help out there. There's a suicide prevention line, which Carolyn has up on the screen. And then there's also for the younger, as she says, the younger generation, there's a text line. So you can text, and I can't see it, Carolyn, how small that is.
It's 741-741. I think the image that the crisis text line uses is geared towards the younger generation to be able to see it. But everyone is welcome to use it. And for some folks, texting might seem less threatening. So the real big takeaway from this is that suicidal thoughts can be a part of someone's grief journey, and that is okay. But if you are having suicidal thoughts, we want to make sure that you're getting connected with help, and that there is help out there, and that there is hope for the future. So we just really want to, share that piece, because when you think about grief, or at least when I did, I wasn't thinking along the lines of suicidal thoughts. So it's something to be aware of, to keep an eye on for yourself and your family and your friends, and to have these resources.
Perfect. Thank you. And so another thing to remember is that healing does not occur in a smooth line or on a timetable. If you've ever dieted, you would know you don't just lose weight in a straight line, or there's no timetable that ever helps. Each one of us do it at our own pace. And that's the same thing with grief. We each get over things in a different way and react to things. But you can expect relapses. You can expect times that you'll be more sad than other times. One of the most helpful things to do, and other techniques that we'll talk about as we go on, is keeping a journal. I heard somebody say yesterday in a lecture that we were talking about that he actually, he started out with just using like a smiley face or a plus sign and then a minus sign, for plus for a good day and a minus sign for a bad day. And then he would expand on that and start to, put highlights down or things that he remembered. And then, as he says, and that turned into my book, because he did write a book about it. So you never know. And also make sure you do mourning now and get through it. You can go to the next one. And that's you.
Yeah, so another piece that we want to share is that often we get asked, okay, I understand the grief, okay, I am experiencing losses, but at what point do I need to ask for help? So we have a lot of different signs and symptoms up here, changes in energy level and sleep patterns, and that doesn't mean that there's a set amount of hours. If someone is only sleeping 2 hours or sleeping 10 hours, that automatically means that they need to seek help. It's really about a change in energy level based from the grief or the loss. Noticeable restlessness, irritability, feeling empty, sad, hopeless, helpless, worthless, guilty, loss of interest in pleasurable activities, changes in appetite, eating habits, or weight, frequent thoughts of death or suicide, difficulties with concentrating or decision making. And that's just a handful of signs or symptoms. And as we've talked about, many people right now are talking about how they are experiencing changes in their appetite and eating habits, and that doesn't mean that they automatically need to link up with some help. It's really looking at how is the loss really affecting the person in all areas of their life. In the mental health first aid curriculum, we talk about someone's ability to live, laugh, and love, and really looking at somebody's ability to have relationships that are meaningful, to go about their day-to-day activities, to be able to engage in something that's meaningful to them. And if they're finding that the loss is taking over that ability to live, laugh, and love, that's when we're going to start to encourage someone to talk to their primary care doctor, talk to a therapist, whatever is going to be most helpful. We also have this great screening tool from our national organization, Mental Health America, and they have this campaign before stage 4 with the idea that if we can catch folks when they're just starting to feel unwell, their journey to feel better will be much faster and they will feel whole sooner. And so there is MHAScreening.org, and there are tons of different screenings. There are ones for young adults, for children. There's one about your work-life balance, depression, anxiety. I really recommend to check it out. It's a great tool that you could even provide to a family member, a friend that you think might be struggling, that isn't too invasive. So definitely check that out, and it's a really great barometer when you're trying to figure out if you need to seek help or not. And I will also take a word from a colleague of mine that there's no wrong time to seek help. If you feel like you could benefit from therapy, from checking in on your mental health, there's no wrong time. Patrick Kennedy, Ted Kennedy's son, he actually is now in New Jersey. He lives in Brigantine, and he talks about everybody needs a checkup from the head up, with really this idea that we focus so much on our physical health and getting physicals and all these different doctors, and we also need to make sure that we are checking in on our mental health. So lots of great resources to consider if you feel that you need to seek some professional help.
Thank you. So understanding grief. Grief can be an ongoing process. I mentioned that before. The intensity and feelings of grief can change. They can and do change. They, just because you're grief doesn't mean you're obsessively thinking about what has happened. And just because you may not be grieving as hard as people think you should, doesn't mean you're forgetting what's happened. Grief involves growth. And I mentioned this earlier, that even with this pandemic, when you look at all the bad things, there have been good things that have happened, like being able to meet Christine and do this presentation with AARP was one of those things that we may not have had time in our work world before. So you need to look at ways that grief the loss of things can help you grow in ways that you may not have had time to look at before. And Carolyn will talk more about those things. You might not experience grief the same way you would have under a normal circumstance. Obviously, we've lost in death. If someone passes, we don't have the ability during this time to do the normal customs we're used to. We aren't having funerals the way we normally do, with viewings and repasses and the bringing over the casserole and sitting with the family. All of those are losses. It's not just the loss of the person who passed, it's also the loss of all of those customs and traditions that we are used to, which help us through the grieving process. And also, it isn't necessarily the familiar stages of grief outlined by Kubler-Ross and David Kessler. It's meant to be a linear process. Hit the next one. So the whole thing about resiliency is, and that's one of the things that I talked about, that seniors have that ability a little bit more to be resilient than your younger family members, because you've been through more, you've had more experience. So the resiliency is really those skills you need to bounce back to life as you know it. And the goal of resiliency is to minimize the impact that traumatic events and that traumatic events have, and to avoid depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's not a trait that we inherit, it's definitely a combination of behaviors and actions that we've learned. So it's more learned behavior. Okay, the next one.
So we're going to start to talk about how to take all of this information that we're learning about grief and loss and stress and think about how we can make some little adjustments in our life to take care of ourselves. And self-care is always important now, especially during COVID-19. So daily movement, moving your body, is something that we really want to make sure that we're continuing to do. And if you are someone that had the routine of going to a gym or an exercise class with friends and that is not available to you right now, looking at how you can replace that. So we heard from Christine that AARP has free Zumba, yoga, Tai Chi classes. So thinking about how to take advantage of these so you're still able to get that daily movement in. It might look differently. If you're someone who walks like the folks in the picture, probably walking right now outside is not ideal because of the heat and humidity. So also thinking about how to potentially walk early in the morning or late at night, or maybe along the beach if you're able to because you get a breeze. But the idea is trying to prioritize daily movement and find something that works for you even during COVID. Another piece is the healthy eating, and we've kind of started to talk about this all along, but if we're thinking about how we're eating, what we're eating, is really help feeding our mind and body. It might be a little bit easier to get a second helping of the kale salad or whatever it is that you're kind of eating, and really thinking about making that a priority. It is so much easier right now for folks to potentially get that extra snack from the fridge, and getting into a routine may help also somebody stay on track around that healthy eating. Another piece around routines that's really important is that everybody's routine has changed to a certain degree, and trying to find a new routine that works for you, that is building self-care into it, is so important, so that we're still doing something that's meaningful every day. For some folks who might have had a part-time job or might have been caring for grandchildren or volunteering and may not be doing that right now, trying to replace that. It's important that we are still doing things that are meaningful for our own mental well-being. So if you are unable to do that meaningful activity that you were doing before COVID, finding a replacement, whether that be some sort of craft or sewing or learning to make bread. I can't tell you on social media how many people I'm seeing making bread now, having a vegetable garden. It's really about thinking, you know, what is something that you've said, yes, when I have time, or I thought when I was retired I'd have more time and I'd be able to do X, Y, and Z. Well, you might have more time now. And having an idea or a list of those things can be really helpful for the days when your normal routine of self-care activities might not be helping really eliminate some of the stresses that are happening right now. Another piece around this, you know, meaningful activities is also making sure that we're exercising our mind, whether it be a crossword puzzle or thinking about, you know, if you played board games before or cards, mahjong with friends, that there are some technology ways to do that. There may be a way that you're able to do it socially distancing. You can be as creative as possible, but really making sure that we're still engaging in similar activities that we were before. Another piece of this is tracking our health. So making sure that those physical doctor appointments, blood work, blood pressure, all the things that before COVID you kind of always had on the back burner that you were working on around your health, making sure that you continue to do that. And the other point around self-care that we wanted to talk about is staying connected. And for everybody, that might look differently. For some folks who was going to an exercise class, maybe you have a neighbor that you can walk on opposite sides of the road and walk together and still be able to chat as well. I've seen a handful of folks in my neighborhood doing that. Maybe it looks like FaceTiming or Zooming or Skyping, video chat of some sort with grandkids or family, friends, sisters, brothers, anything that's going to help you stay connected when we can't always be connected face to face is so important. And if you need some help learning new technology, I guarantee that there is a teenager somewhere bored that might be willing to help guide you through it. And if not, as Vicki said before, ask. There are plenty of people out there to help you, and there is no silly question. As someone that doesn't identify as a baby boomer, I'm constantly asking for help around technology to learn it. It's not always a generational or age thing. It's something that is new that we need to learn. So making sure to take advantage of that. So when we're thinking about self-care, we're going to need to accept that some things have changed and we can't control it. And for folks that have maybe that type A personality that really like to have things organized and have their thumb on what's going to happen, this can be tough. And trying to accept that, okay, there's a lot less I can control right now during this pandemic, but focusing on what you can, having that routine. You know, talking about routines as a great self-care tool isn't necessarily the sexiest thing I can talk about, but it's so important. Our routines, as I've said, have changed, but making new ones is really important. Another piece is making sure that we're getting credible information, and I will put a plug in that AARP is going to have a great webinar, I believe it is, to help identify this fake news.
Right, and that's on August 7th. I think Christine will drop it in the chat box.
I will, yep, I can go ahead and drop it in the chat. It's actually going to be Thursday, August 6th at 7 o'clock. And it's called How to Sort Fact from Fiction Online. So I'll go ahead and I'll put a quick description and the link to register in the chat.
Thanks, Christine. I had 7 o'clock in my head.
And you'll see us there taking part in being a patron of that, because it's very challenging in this day and age to identify credible information. And the best thing for our mental health is making sure that we have credible information, that we're learning about what's happening. Another piece is that watching the news and going through social media sometimes can be best if it's limited. And the best example I can give is something that I've started, especially since the pandemic, is that before I turn on the news, before I go to my phone to look through social media, I kind of gauge, you know, from 0 to 10, how are you feeling right now? And quite frankly, if I'm a 5 or below, I'm not turning it on to take the risk that it might even go lower. But if I'm okay, you know, an 8, whatever it might be. And then about 10 minutes in, I've really learned to kind of reevaluate with myself, how are you feeling now? And if I'm feeling an 8 or 9 or 10, great, I'll put in another 10 minutes of scrolling or listening to the news. But if I find that I'm now at a 6 or a 5, I'm going to turn it off, because, you know, we're trying to get this information, we're trying to stay connected, but sometimes it can make us feel worse. We can start to worry more, we can start to become more stressed. And so making sure that we're really conscious of that. That's why they really recommend not to read or watch any news related to COVID-19, or I would say really, whether it be police brutality, the election, racism, all these things, is that we want to make sure that we're not getting that information right before bed. We want to practice good sleep hygiene. So that might mean not looking at electronics an hour or 2 before bed, having a routine to ease our body in so our brain knows it's time to sleep and get that good quality sleep, especially now. Another piece around self-care is making sure that we're engaging in positive self-talk. You know, Vicki talked earlier that, you know, we shouldn't be talking to ourselves any differently than we would talk to our best friends. And we're probably all at some point or another guilty of potentially being a little bit shorter with ourselves than we would be with a loved one. So really making sure that we're building ourselves up. I am capable of handling this. I will get through today. I am hopeful for the future. Any kind of positive self-talk. And another piece is also self-compassion. So being kind to yourself. You don't have to be perfect. And if we lower the expectations and are kind to ourselves, most often we're going to even exceed our expectations. So it's a little bit of reverse psychology, but so important to make sure that we are being kind to ourselves. So kind of a sum up of how to help ourselves is we want to make sure that we're building a virtual support system. Like we talked about before, finding the best ways to connect with our friends, our family, potentially new people. Making sure we have a good support system virtually can really make a difference. Focusing on hope, seeing the good things. We'll talk about practicing gratitude in a moment. And overall, taking care of ourselves. So again, that goes back to making sure we're getting good sleep, making sure that we're exercising, making sure that we're eating healthy. All the things I guarantee that you know, but sometimes or some days, we're all kind of skipping over. And then how can we help others? One piece is not to avoid the topic. So making sure that we are listening. We're not there to give advice. And we're not there to necessarily take things personally. I talk about some days in my routine, I try to just leave the house because I'm working from home now. And quite often that means going through Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, some sort of coffee drive-through line. And I noticed at the height of people being quarantined, it was like a death match trying to go through the drive-through line. And reminding myself not to take it personally and that we're all really struggling as a community right now very much helped me allow everyone else to get the caffeine that they needed along with myself. And it's a little bit of a silly example, but I think that if we can remind ourselves from a silly example not to take things personally, that when things are a little bit more heated, that we might remember to not take things personally. And the other thing is avoid giving advice. Most often, folks want to be heard, and they know what they need to do. So I promised that I would talk about gratitude a little bit. And so I will remind you to be grateful. And yes, I did say be grateful, despite there being a pandemic and an election and police brutality, all of this. Be grateful. People who consciously count their blessings tend to be happier and less depressed. And I think that, you know, when we think about all the prescription commercials we see on TV, and if I was saying, hey, guess what? I have something that will help you be happier and less depressed, you'd think, ooh. And you don't have to take anything. You have to count your blessings. You have to be grateful. And being grateful has so many great benefits. And the really cool benefit that I have found out about since COVID-19 is that gratitude can actually help your physical health in response to respiratory infection. So think about COVID and how it affects our respiratory system. So being grateful, practicing gratitude not only is good for your psychological well-being, it also can help with your respiratory response of infections. So all around, be grateful. And that doesn't mean trying to come up with the most grandiose things to be grateful for. It could simply be, I woke up today. My technology cooperated today. The dog didn't bark as much as I thought it would during the webinar. Simple things, and taking that time to identify them can really have good benefits and lasting effects on your brain. The one piece to keep in mind with gratitude is, let's say right now you think of 3 things that you're grateful for, and you wake up tomorrow and go, oh, that Carolyn, she didn't know what she was talking about. I'm still stressed out. It's going to take time. And it's something that it's like a practice muscle. We have to build over time to see really good benefits, but it's something that is free, that we all have access to try and do, and can all really experience some good results from gratitude. Anything, Vic, you wanted to add to this?
I just had mentioned earlier about that great YouTube video that I really showed to our group the other night about an experiment that they did where they actually asked people to write a letter to somebody they were grateful for their influence on their lives. And most of the people they picked people that were mostly alive. There was one gentleman that picked somebody who had already passed. But then after they wrote the letter, the people doing the experiment kind of said, we want you to call the person and read the letter. So they did, and they videotaped them doing that. And they found that the person who was the most depressed walking into that experiment ended up being the happiest after that exercise, because showing gratitude is really something that does kind of make your soul feel happy.
And that's a great intro by saying happy, is that there is this fabulous online course about happiness. And it's a free course that you can take, and it's from Yale professor Laurie Santos. And the story goes that Professor Santos was noticing that the students at Yale were not happy. And she expected them to be happy, thinking about the fact that, hey, you're at an Ivy League school, you're in New England, you have few worries, you're a young adult, all these things that she expected and she wasn't seeing. So she created a syllabus, and it was the science of well-being. And she was hoping that she could get 30 or 40 students to sign up for this class. And the first time they offered it, they finally had to cut it off at 450 students because they didn't have a larger lecture hall. So she identified immediately that there's such a need, no matter the generation, to be looking at the science of well-being, happiness. And so it's a great free course. I saw her speak, and she has such a passion and a really good pulse on how to build happiness. So whether it be looking at building happiness, practicing gratitude, thinking about joy, all these things can really help combat the stresses and can in turn really help feed your mind and body. I have a little activity for us to try right now, and it is for us to focus on our breath. And as the heart expands, really trying to breathe in for 4 seconds. And then should be going. We were talking about being grateful for technology working earlier, right? There we go. So as we see it going in, we're breathing in for 4 seconds. And then really focus on your breath out for 5 seconds. Having something to focus on like this heart can be really helpful. I have an iWatch, and it does it with a lotus flower. But being able to focus on something can really help someone who is struggling with mindfulness practice of staying in the moment and focusing on your breath. There is a lot of great research out there to show that it can help with your mental health, but it can be challenging for some folks. So you will receive this PowerPoint at the end. You can practice playing with the heart if that helps. There are lots of apps and books out there. Find what's going to work for you. And the idea is really just trying to find something that is going to help your mental health and really help kind of bring your mind and body healthy together as one. We talked about earlier. Go ahead.
Interesting that today our friend Patrick Kennedy posted on his Facebook page from Yale News to to improve students' mental health, the Yale study finds to teach them how to breathe. So there really is a lot of research on this breathing.
Yes. So we wanted to leave everyone today with the resources around this FEMA grant for Hope and Healing. So there are free emotional supports around COVID-19 for folks, and it's 7 days a week, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. There's multilingual services, and you can call 866-202-HELP, and that spells out it's 4357, or that text option again is to text NJ Hope to 51684. And again, all these resources will be sent to you after the webinar. And we really encourage you to take advantage of any and all so you're really able to help dissipate the stress that we're all experiencing during COVID.
And Carolyn, Carol has with us today suggested keeping a gratitude journal. Make one entry every day and define your gratitude for something every day. What a great idea.
That's awesome. And I have folks that have said that they've put it right in their planner, that they have it where they list 3 things along with their to-do list in the morning. Some folks like to do it at the end of the day after the day has happened. Everybody's going to have a little bit of a different way, but making sure that you are taking that moment to identify, and like Carol said, writing it down. There's even benefit to not just thinking it, but also writing it as building that good psychological benefits to it. So thank you.
Great. And I will just say, as someone who has found it difficult sometimes to really focus in on mindfulness, the activities where it's, you know, you're breathing, but your breathing is also paired with an image like that have just been so effective, because I think it really helps folks kind of connect and stay in that moment to really kind of feel the full effects of that breath and that de-escalation for all of us. I'm taking a look in the chat, and I think we don't have any unanswered questions. Carol also mentioned mass yoga classes that define the correct breathing techniques similarly, right? So to make sure you're doing it the right way to get the best benefit out of that. One additional thing that I wanted to just piggyback off of when you were talking about the supports and resources that are available for folks around mental health, with COVID, telehealth services have been expanded. So back in March, New Jersey opened up telehealth for not just, you know, sort of like your general practitioner, but also mental health services are also services that are covered and can happen in the telehealth environment. So I just wanted to flag that for folks as well. And with that, we don't have any additional comments or questions. So I'm just going to close us out by saying I'm very grateful for being able to partner with the Mental Health Association of New Jersey on this presentation, and for everyone who joined us today for this discussion. We will be sending you out a follow-up email with the PowerPoint and a survey, and we wish everyone a good rest of your day. Thank you, and be well.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye, stay well.